Hey guys, Mr. Yaisley here. Just want to move on to the next section of the notes where we're talking about dealing with linear equations with decimals. So decimals are really just another form of fractions. So how we actually deal with them isn't way different than what we did before. So to clear decimals, we're going to still multiply. We're going to multiply every term in the entire equation by 1 with as many zeros behind it. Now what I mean by that is the minimum that you're going to multiply by would be 10. You could also multiply by 100, 1000. The zeros are going to line up with how many places, decimal places there are. So numbers to the right of the decimal of your decimal with the most decimal places. So if you have a decimal with 3 decimal places, you're going to multiply by 1000. If you have a decimal, your largest decimal has 2 decimal places, you would multiply by 100. If it only has 1 decimal place, you'd multiply by 10. So the zeros are going to line up with the decimal places. So that's a big important part to remember, is how many zeros behind that 1 are based on your decimal number with the most decimal places, or the greatest amount of decimal places. All right, so let's jump in and let's take a look. You flip your notes over onto the next page. You should have 3 examples here, and so we're going to work through those. So first one, example A, I have 0.4x plus 9.2 equals 10. Now, for some of you, you might be like, well, I could subtract 9.2 from 10 and still know where I'm at. Sometimes it can get more complicated. So I'm not saying you can't do that. If you can solve it and show your work and do that, then please feel free. But if we need to get rid of the decimals because they're getting too tricky, this is how we're going to do it, and I'll show you. So I noticed that of my 3 total terms in this equation, 2 of them have decimal places. Well, even if only 1 of them had decimal places, I may still want to get rid of the decimal. Now what I got to figure out is, what's the greatest amount of decimal places? Well, of the 2 terms, both of them only have 1 decimal place. So, and what I mean by decimal place, again, we've got a 4 here and a 2 here. So numbers to the right of the decimal place. So when I look at this, I'm going to say, all right, well then I'm just going to multiply everything by 1 with 1 0 behind it, which is the number 10. So I'm going to multiply this by 10, I'm going to multiply this by 10, and I'm going to multiply this by 10. Well, if you remember back from your pre-algebra or algebra prep class, that's called multiplying by a power of 10, and that shifts the decimal to the right. Or excuse me, yes, to the right. So it's just going to move every decimal place to the right. Well, when I do that, when I multiply 10 times 0.4x, I get 4x. When I multiply 10 times 9.2, I get 92, because it's just moving this decimal this way, moving this decimal this way, right? And then I've got 10 times 10, which is 100. Well, now I'm rid of the decimals. It looks more realistic to what I've seen before, very similar, so I could go into my to-do and undo and solve. So again, my to-do undo, I see that the first thing that they are doing to the x is they're multiplying it by 4. The second thing is they're adding 92. So I'm going to reverse that order with inverse operation. So instead of adding 92, I'm going to subtract 92. Instead of multiplying by 4, I'm going to divide by 4. And then I'm going to solve. So divide my equation in half. First step, subtract 92. Subtract 92. Well, as always, these canceled, so I'm left with 4x. 100 minus 92 is 8. And now I need to move on to the next step, which says divide by 4. Divide by 4. As always, that causes these to cancel, so I'm left with x equals 8 divided by 4 is 2. Now again, just to reiterate, this is not the only way to do it. You could do it just staying with the decimals, but I'm going to tell you right now, some of your assignment decimals are much more complicated than what you're seeing here. So it may be a good idea to make sure you understand this idea of multiplying by a power of 10, or multiplying by 100, or 1,000, or whatever it is that you need to, so that you can solve. Because the more complicated it is, or the more decimal places, the more complicated it becomes. And you will not be allowed to use your calculator on your assignments and tests and quizzes. So for this portion and other portions of the class, we will use calculators. But on this portion, we're going to do all the math on freehand here. All right, so let's take a look at example B. We've got 0.4a plus 0.8 equals 2. This is really similar to example A, so if you want to pause it, try it yourself, and then check your answer, please feel free. Well, first thing I notice, decimal places, I've got 1 here and 1 here. I don't have any there, so I'm just going to multiply every one of these terms by 10. And remember, you have to do it to every term, not just the ones with the decimal places. If you multiply any term by that number, you got to multiply them all by that number. So when I do that, I know that that's going to move my decimal place, so I should end up with 4a. Move my decimal place, so I should end up with plus 8, and equals 2 times 10, which is 20. So that looks way similar to what we've done before. So now I'm into my to do and undo lists. So to do, to undo. First thing I notice about they did to A, multiply by 4. Second thing, add 8. So let's reverse that order and use inverse operations. So instead of adding 8, I'm going to subtract 8. Instead of multiplying by 4, I'm going to divide by 4. And there are my steps. So first step, subtract 8. So divide my equation in half, subtract 8 from both sides. Those cancel, so I'm left with 4a. 20 minus 8 equals 12. Next step, divide by 4. Those cancel as always, so I get a equals 12 divided by 4 is 3. A equals 3. All right.